some mental health stuff, some gun violence stuff. What's the difference between you and your opponent type stuff. So got it. This will be cool because you'll actually see it now, as opposed to just so you can see what's going on.
So how far into the dialogue do you
Good evening and welcome to tonight's telephone town hall with your Congressman, Chris Van Hollen. My name is Kevin Walling, and I'm the new chair of the Democratic Party here in Montgomery County, and I'll be the host for tonight's conversation with our great congressman. We'll begin in just a moment, and we're excited to have you join us this evening. Before we begin, just a few quick points to make. Right now, we're in the process of dialing out to thousands of Democrats across the 8th Congressional District, inviting them to join us just like you have. So just stay on the line, and we'll be hearing from Congressman Van Hollen in just a moment. Also, we want to hear from you tonight. So if you'd like to ask a question of Congressman Van Hollen, please press 0 on your telephone keypad, and you'll be connected directly with one of our volunteer operators. Again, press 0 to ask a question of Congressman Van Hollen, and we'll bring you live to ask your question on the air. And we're going to try and get through as many questions as we can this evening. If you've just joined us, good evening and welcome to tonight's live telephone town hall with our Congressman, Chris Van Hollen. My name is Kevin Walling, and I'm the chair of the Democratic Party here in Montgomery County, and I'll be the host for this evening's event. I promise we'll be getting started in just a moment. Right now, we're in the process of dialing out to thousands of Democrats across the 8th Congressional District, so please stay on the line, and we'll hear from Congressman Van Hollen in just a moment. As I mentioned earlier, we want to hear from you. This is an interactive conversation, so if at any point you'd like to ask Congressman Van Hollen a question, please press 0 on your telephone keypad, and we're going to try and get through as many questions as possible. Again, press 0 to ask Congressman Van Hollen a question. And without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to our progressive champion, Congressman Chris Van Hollen, here in the 8th Congressional District. Congressman Van Hollen, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you, Kevin. It's great to be with you, and thank you for your leadership for the Montgomery County Democratic Party. And to everybody who's joined us, thank you for being part of this conversation, and thank you for the privilege of allowing me to serve the people of the 8th Congressional District in the United States Congress. It's a great honor to represent you there. What I thought I'd do is just give you an overview of what Congress has done and, unfortunately, what Congress has not done in the last Congress, just to give you a sense of the shape of the issues in this election. During the question period, I'm happy to try and answer any questions you've got on domestic issues or foreign policy issues, but right now I'm going to focus on domestic issues. And it's sad to report what you already know from reading the newspapers or watching TV, which is that this particular Congress, the 113th Congress, has been one of the least productive in recent history. There's a long list of things that we should be doing in the House of Representatives that we're not. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of those things that we should have been doing where we never even got to vote on them in the House. So it's not a question of having had a debate where people voted yes or no on these questions. It's a fact that we did not get a vote in the House on these very important issues. And I believe that people, regardless of their political persuasion, think that we should at the very least let democracy work its will. So what are the things we've not even voted on? Gun safety, universal background checks for people who have been engaged in criminal activity, making sure they can't get a gun. After the terrible shootings in Newtown, just before the start of the new Congress, I thought the country would be ready for some common sense provisions like a universal background check. Didn't even get a vote. Common sense immigration reform. A bipartisan immigration reform bill passed the United States Senate more than a year ago. In the House, we never even got to vote on that bill. Raising the national minimum wage to $10.10 an hour. It's a scandal that in this country you can work full time and still be below the federal poverty level. Maryland did the right thing in the state, but at the federal level, not even a vote. No vote on equal pay for equal work. No vote on a national a bill to end employment discrimination based on sexual orientation. No vote on the Disclose Act, which would allow people to know who spends millions and millions of secret dollars and money to try and elect candidates. No vote to deal with the Voting Rights Act provisions that were struck down by the Supreme Court. And the list goes on and on. Let me tell you what we did do. We voted 50 times in the House plus to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. And when that didn't work last year, we saw a shameful 16-day government shutdown by Ted Cruz and the Tea Party folks, who said that if they couldn't overturn the Affordable Care Act through legislation, they were going to shut down the government. That obviously didn't work. And then the House authorized money be spent, taxpayer money be sent, to sue the president on a variety of issues. Add to that the Benghazi hearings ad nauseum and the efforts to roll back every environmental law on the book, and you get a sense of what's at play in Congress today. So I'm going to end with this call, please. That's what's happening in Congress. We need to shake things up. We know that the Tea Party is very energized in Maryland and around the country. The only people who can lose this election in the state of Maryland are Democrats who don't come out to vote. And the risk is very real that if Democrats in Montgomery County do not come out to vote, that we could see a Republican governor and Republican wins in other areas. So we got to get out there to help Anthony Brown and the gubernatorial ticket, Brian Frosch, and other Democratic candidates. And in the primaries here in Montgomery County, we saw a really abysmal turnout. Montgomery County's turnout in the primary was actually lower than other jurisdictions in the state of Maryland. That just has never happened. So we're here to thank you for your active engagement in the political process and to urge you to continue to exercise your vote as you have in the past. And with that, just let me thank you again, and we are here to try and answer any questions that you've got.
Thank you, Congressman Van Hollen. Again, my name is Kevin Walling. If you just joined us, I'm the new chair of the Democratic Party here in the county, and we want to hear from you this evening. So please press 0 if you'd like to ask Congressman Van Hollen a question. Before we take our first question, and that's going to be from Richard in Bethesda, I'd like to ask everyone on the call, using your telephone keypad, press 1 if you plan on voting in this upcoming election. Again, press 1 if you plan on voting in this upcoming election. Press 2 if you are not planning at the current moment to vote in this upcoming election. And press 3 if you're undecided or unsure. Again, press 1 if you plan on voting on November 4th or during early voting. Press 2 if you don't plan on voting. And press 3 if you're unsure. And again, please press 0 to ask a question. Congressman Van Hollen will be taking questions from all over the 8th Congressional District. And Congressman, our first question comes from Richard from Bethesda. Richard, you're live on the air.
Well, thank you very much. And Congressman, I want to thank you for all the good work you've been doing in the House of Representatives. I used to work on Capitol Hill years ago for the Joint Economic Committee. And when Paul Sarbanes and Bill Proxmire were chairman. But anyway, the question I have has to do with the president's policy on bombing Iraq and Syria. And I don't quite understand your policy. I happen to support what he's doing, and I think it will succeed if it's pursued and enforced. And I just wonder what your view is.
Sure. First of all, thank you for your service on Capitol Hill in the past, and thanks for the question. So I support the president's policy with respect to providing air support for the Iraqi troops on the ground and the Kurdish troops on the ground in both Iraq, as well as the actions the president has taken to date in Syria in terms of going after specific ISIS targets, command and control, and helping with the Syrian Kurds up along the Syrian-Turkish border. So I do support that. I also believe, though, that Congress has a responsibility to weigh in on this issue. Right now, the president is operating under the 2001 authorization to use military force. That was the resolution passed by Congress before I was a member of Congress. It was passed by Congress in response to the September 11, 2001 al-Qaeda attacks. And I understand the basis for the president's position because ISIS began as al-Qaeda in Iraq. That is their DNA. And so I don't have a quarrel with that. But where I believe the Congress should act is in narrowing the scope of the authorization to use military force. The president himself has said it's a blank check, and it would allow the executive, any executive, to send American combat ground troops into Iraq and Syria. And I am strongly opposed to having this become Iraq War 2.0. I believe the Iraq War was a very bad decision. I think it led to a lot of the problems we're seeing, including ISIS. Now, let me just say, since we did have one vote, there was one aspect of the president's plan that I have concerns about, and that was this proposal to spend $500 million to arm and equip the so-called Syrian rebels. And my concern with that is that the rebels have made clear that their number one priority, their objective is to get rid of Assad, the Assad regime in Syria. And Assad is a brutal dictator. But in this particular case, when you weaken Assad militarily, you actually unintentionally help ISIS and strengthen ISIS. And so I do have concerns with that one piece of the plan. But overall, I support the actions the president's taking, understanding that Congress needs to act, as I said.
Great. Richard, thank you so much for that question. Thank you, Congressman. Again, my name is Kevin Walling. I'm the new chair of the Democratic Party here in the county. And as the Congressman mentioned in his opening remarks, we're 36 days out from Election Day, and even sooner for early voting. And we need every committed Democrat not only to show up at the polls, and 97% of you on the event tonight said that you would, that you are planning to vote, that you pressed 1, that you are planning to vote. Only 1% said no, and 2% said that you were unsure. So these are incredible numbers. But right now, press 1 if you'd be willing to volunteer for the Democrats here in the county, whether it be knocking on doors or making phone calls. Congressman, maybe you can speak to just how powerful that those GOTV efforts are. Again, press 1 if you can volunteer with the party. And
yeah, look, the grassroots efforts are the key to winning in these races, even more so in these midterm elections, right? During presidential elections, a lot of voters get mobilized and get out to vote. But in midterm elections, you tend to see lower turnouts. So lower turnouts in Maryland mean one thing, that Republicans have a better chance. And so it's really important that people get mobilized. In all the national polling I've seen, the Tea Party is very energized. They're coming out to vote against the president. And even though the president's not on the ballot, we all need to get out to support the president, but also to support Democratic causes and positions.
Thank you.
Please sign up if you can, if you have a little time to volunteer.
Absolutely. And again, please press 1 if you're able to join your local Democratic Party to help us in these efforts. Thank you, Congressman. Congressman, our next question comes from Carl. Carl, you're live on the air.
Thank you. Congressman Chris Van Hollen, we certainly love you and support you, and I have voted in all of the elections. And the one thing that really concerns me is that when I listen to all the Republicans talk about what they wanted in their version of increasing the minimum wage, they're more like they want the states' rights people to have more control, the state governments. I don't see that that's the big problem. The big problem is when you have big corporations that can obviously afford to pay their workers. That's good. If you have workers that need training, yeah, let them have lower than the minimum wage for 6 months or a year. What is the chances that the Democrats can come up with ways of getting the Republicans to commit on what they really want and then putting a bill together that satisfies the Democrats as well? Doesn't get everything that we want, but it's a real compromise taking into account the Republicans because I think that the Democrats are going to, if they can get anything through Congress, they will get more in the way of votes than the Republicans would.
Absolutely. That's a good point, Congressman.
Well, first, Carl, thank you for your kind words and for your support. And we would welcome any Republican counterproposal in the House of Representatives to our minimum wage increase proposal. Unfortunately, they have not put anything on the table despite our invitation to do so. And they've taken the position that the federal government has no business at all setting a national minimum wage, even though it's been part of our national economic strategy since Harry Truman and before. And the purchasing power of the minimum wage today is lower than it was when Harry Truman was president, because when we raise the minimum wage, we do not typically index it for inflation, which I think we should, but we haven't. And so we've asked our Republican colleagues to join us in this effort and said to them, as you suggested, that if they don't like our proposal, to put their own proposal on the table. But again, they are just, a majority of them are ideologically opposed to the minimum wage. Although I happen to agree with you that if we actually allowed a vote on this in the House, if the Speaker said, let's vote on a minimum wage, I also think it's very likely that it would pass, because Republicans don't want to go home and explain to their constituents why they're against what I think is a pretty common sense measure. But the Speaker has just refused to hold a vote at all, and we're going to keep pushing, and that's what elections are all about.
Thank you, Carl, for that question. Thank you, Congressman. Again, please press 0 if you'd like to ask Congressman Van Hollen a question. We're having a great conversation this evening with Democrats across the 8th Congressional District. And our next question comes from Howard from Bethesda. Howard, you're live on the air with Congressman Van Hollen.
Thank you very much, Congressman Van Hollen. I think it's really courageous of you to come out like this and listen to people and talk to people. And I believe you've outlined the problems that we all face. Your positions are ones that I'm fully supportive of, but we've got a gridlock in Congress, and it doesn't seem to me very feasible that we can get any progress until we get a change, and that change is unlikely to come unless we have redistricting. And so in the meantime, while we wait for the time to come when we can elect a Democratic Congress, is there any hope that we can break the gridlock in the interim?
Well, first of all, thank you for your comments, and this is a really important question you've raised, and there's no easy answer. Clearly, in the short term, we do need to focus on elections, both in Maryland and around the country. As we speak, there are many congressional districts that are up for grabs, and where they could turn on the turnout and come down to a few hundred votes. I think that you're right that the chances of winning back the House this year for Democrats, which would require winning a net of 17 seats, at least at this point in time, looks like a tough climb. And so it will have to be a two-step process if that's the case. If we don't win enough seats this election, then the 2016 presidential election could take you over that 17 seat mark. After all, when Barack Obama won in 2008, we picked up 25 seats at that time because you had the energy and excitement around a presidential election. And again, if the Democrats have a strong presidential candidate, that could help in 2016. In the meantime, it's going to require some of our colleagues who have taken a position of absolutely no compromise to be willing to either change their positions, or at the very least that the Speaker of the House, Speaker Boehner, decides that he's no longer going to kowtow to the Tea Party faction within the House of Representatives, and that he's going to allow a vote on some of these issues. for the good of the country, but I would argue also for the good of the Republican Party. Let's take immigration reform, for example. Going into the 2016 presidential election, Republicans are not going to fare very well with Hispanic voters if they don't tackle that issue. And so Speaker Boehner has a choice to make. Does he want to continue to bend over backwards to satisfy the Tea Party wing in the House and not bring this to a vote? Or does he want to have a vote to resolve this issue for the good of the country and, as I said, for the good of the national Republican Party? So those are some of the choices that Republicans will face over the next 2 years. And I'm hoping that enough of them will be willing to, meet us halfway to move the country forward.
Great. Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for that question. Again, please press 0 if you'd like to ask Congressman Van Hollen a question. We're talking to thousands of Democrats across the 8th Congressional District. And our next question, Congressman, comes from Shirley from Silver Spring. Shirley, you're live on the air.
Mr. Van Hollen, I want to thank you for the most beautiful job that you do. As far as the Speaker of the House, it's hard to be able to handle him. I think our country is really in very, very sad predicament right at this time. But I want to ask a personal question about more housing for the elderly people that did not have retirement and did not have 401ks, and they worked all their lives. My grandfather was sheriff of Montgomery County for many, many years, and I think some people that are 70 or over and are unable to get out and get to the polls, would it be a good idea to send them an absentee ballot without them calling you? Is that possible? Thank you.
Again, thank you for all your support for the Democrats, and thank you for your kind comments and for your grandfather's service, I believe, as sheriff. And yes, the short answer is yes. We can get people absentee ballots, people who are unable to make it to the polls. And Kevin and I will go over that process at some point here, but you can get absentee ballots and then either mail in or fax them in, or you can request absentee ballots online, actually. And there are a series of deadlines as they relate to both. But in order to get one by mail, people need to contact the Board of Elections and get their ballot in hand by Tuesday, October 28th, and then mail it back in by 8 p.m. on Election Day. So we're happy to post information on how to do that, and maybe Kevin can elaborate.
Sure. Thank you, Congressman. Shirley, thank you for your question. And your local Democratic Party is here to support you. You can always call our office, and I'll give you the number. It's 301-946-1000. Again, that number is 301-946-1000. And if you just identify yourself and ask about absentee voting, we can certainly help you through that process. We're here as a party to serve you. And we want to make sure that happens. So please feel free. And anyone on this call should know if you have any questions about voting or Election Day information or early voting, you can always call that number. And I'll share that number again later on in the program. Congressman, our next question comes from Ken in Chevy Chase. Ken, you're live on the air.
Thanks. Congressman Chris, also thanks for your leadership, even though I'm not a registered Democrat. Apparently, and I'd like to say, too, I appreciate the wisdom of the Democratic Party for putting you on point on the difficult economic and budgetary matters facing us in our country. My question is your general thoughts on the economy and maybe specific thoughts on the role of the Federal Reserve as it moves up from its zero federal funds interest rate policy.
Sure. Thank you, and thanks for the question. Look, the good news is the economy has been steadily improving, right? Since the fiscal collapse, we've seen it steadily climb. We've seen the unemployment rates drop. We've seen the value of people's retirement savings rebound. And so that's all good news. On the other side of the ledger, clearly we would prefer to see faster economic growth. And there are a number of things I think we can and should be doing to encourage greater economic growth. For example, we need to make a greater national investment in our infrastructure. We need to modernize our infrastructure so that we can compete in the 21st century. And that has a win-win impact, right? It allows us to become more productive as we modernize and streamline our transportation systems, as we improve our broadband access, as we deal with some of our energy infrastructure. And it also helps put people back to work. And one of the great tragedies of the last couple of years has been Congress has not come up with a long-term plan to finance our infrastructure. I've actually proposed a bill, as has the president, that would close a lot of special interest tax breaks, some of which actually encourage American companies to move jobs and capital overseas, and to use the savings from closing those tax breaks to invest in our economy and infrastructure here at home. There are other important measures we can take in terms of investing in scientific research. With respect to the Federal Reserve, I do support their current policy of gradually, releasing the throttle with respect to quantitative easing. I think that the measures the Federal Reserve took under Chairman Bernanke helped bring us out of the deep recession. I think they had a positive impact. And I think now that the Federal Reserve needs to very cautiously and carefully take its foot off of that accelerator there. And I think Chairman Yellen is doing a good job in that respect, being careful not to sort of snuff out the recovery, but also to be wary of inflation effects down the road.
Great. Thank you, Congressman Ken. Thank you for that question. Again, please press 0 if you'd like to ask Congressman Van Hollen a question. We're on with thousands of Democrats across the 8th Congressional District, and you can always press 1 to volunteer with your local Democratic Party. And Congressman, our next question comes from Sally in Chevy Chase. Sally, you're live on the air.
Thank you. Congressman, I understand that you have proposed something about salaries of directors of company and links to share ownership to get it down so that the salaries of presidents and CEOs of corporations is not quite as well compared to what their workers make, that the workers would get more and maybe they'd get a little less. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that.
Yes, and thank you for this question. And it ties very well into the previous question with respect to the economy, because one thing we obviously want to do is put more people to work and get the economy growing faster. But the other issue we've got to deal with is the question of wages. What we've seen really since the late 1970s is huge advances in worker productivity. In other words, workers are more and more productive over time. They're creating more and more wealth for our economy. But as we've seen worker productivity go up, you've actually seen real wages in this country be pretty flat, stagnate for most workers. So most workers have seen rising productivity, but pretty flat wages. Now, there's one area where wages have gone through the roof and bonuses, and that's with respect to CEOs. And you've seen huge leaps in, the pay for the very top 1% in this country, while you've seen those stagnating wages. this is a result of many factors. There's no sort of silver bullet here. It comes about because of a number of different things. But I have proposed legislation to at least begin to get out at this issue. And what the legislation does is says that taxpayers should not be asked to subsidize CEO and other bonuses over $1 million unless those corporations are going to be at least giving their workers wage increases that are comparable to productivity gains, right? Because workers should be sharing in those productivity gains. So this would still allow corporations to pay their CEOs as much as they wanted. But what we're saying is, if you're a corporation and you really want to be able to take a deduction for bonuses over $1 million, which is what they do today, that if you're going to get the benefit of that deduction, then you've got to be rewarding your employees at least at the rise in productivity that they're providing to the economy. And that would begin to close this very big gap between productivity gains on workers on the one hand and very flat wages over time on the other. So thanks for asking the question, because yes, we obviously want a growing economy, but we also want more broadly shared prosperity as we all pitch in.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, Sally, for that question. Again, please press 0 if you'd like to ask Congressman Van Hollen a question. My name is Kevin Walling. I'm the chair of the Democratic Party here in the county, and we're having a great conversation with Democrats across the county about your priorities. And Congressman, our next question comes from Carl from Silver Spring. Carl, you're live on the air.
Thank you. Congressman Van Hollen, with regards to the stalemate in Congress, I think we have a situation that could be solved by your working with the executive part of our government, because it's coming to the point where the certain Congress people are not carrying out the wishes of their people. They're overly influenced by the lack of money that they'll get if they go against something that the Tea Party says or something that somebody else says with regards to tax reform. These types of things are, I think, immoral, if not illegal. And I think that there should be some way that the Democrats or the president can have investigations to find out if these congressmen are really representing the people. And if they find out with the FBI's help that they are not, then these congressmen, there should be actions to remove them from office.
Great. Thank you, Carl. Congressman, do you want to maybe jump in on this?
Well, a couple points. And this is why obviously the elections are so important, but it also raises another point, which I was referring to earlier, which is that on all the issues I talked about, minimum wage, equal pay for equal work, and the others, it was not simply a matter of the House of Representatives voting and we lose on those issues. It is the refusal of the speaker to even allow a vote, which is anti-democratic. I mean, I'm small d, right? Democracy has been suspended in the House of Representatives. And we have been doing our very best to highlight that with the American people, because after all, the Tea Party folks claimed that they wanted a Congress that was transparent, that was accountable. Well, nothing is more sort of ducking of your responsibilities than refusing to vote on these issues. So we're going to keep pressing that. The other thing that you raised is the question of money in politics, and this also goes to the issue of transparency. I introduced a bill a number of years ago called the Disclose Act. It's a very simple idea. It says that voters, all of you and all of the people voting throughout the country, have a right to know who is spending millions of dollars on those campaign ads to try and elect or defeat candidates. Because right now, you know, people can come up with a nice sounding name for their organization, you know, the Better Way for America, and it can be funded anonymously and secretly. And so the Disclose Act would shine a light on that. And we really need to send a wake-up call again, this does come back to elections and having the press shine a light on all these issues. And we've got to all work harder to expose, the hypocrisy we see from so many on these matters.
Thank you, Congressman. And Carl, thank you for that question. Again, please press 0 if you'd like to ask Congressman Van Hollen a question. And our next question comes from Joanne in Rockville. Joanne, you're live on the air.
Hi, I wanted to know what was the incentive to get young people out to vote, young people under 30. Most of them, especially in the state of Maryland, employees are staying longer on jobs. So college students are graduating with student loans and no jobs. So what's your incentive to get them out to vote?
Well, there are lots of incentives to get out to vote in both the council races, our local Montgomery County races, as well as the state of Maryland races, as well as the federal races. Let me just go through them briefly because all those offices are on the ballot. So right here in Montgomery County with our county executive, Ike Leggett, and Democratic County council candidates, obviously they make decisions every day that impact people's lives, including young people's lives. So, for example, Montgomery Community College, which is a great college for our young people and has large enrollments at by today's standards, affordable prices, is absolutely essential. At the state level, the same thing. Maryland has been one of the states that has actually held down its tuition even during the tough times. One of Governor O'Malley's proudest achievements and Lieutenant Governor Brown's achievements have been to keep down tuition at in-state universities. And finally, at the federal level, this has been a huge issue. The president and the Democrats in Congress have worked very hard to try to reduce the student loan burden because, as we know, student debt right now is very high. We have worked to keep down the interest rates on federal student loans. We've also significantly increased over the last year our Pell Grant support. And I should emphasize as to how elections make a difference. My colleague Paul Ryan puts together the Republican budget, and I can tell you the House Republican budget absolutely guts our national investment in higher education. So that would have a direct impact on young people. And they also got other important investments that will help lead to greater job creation over time, to get to your second point. So for young people, these elections are very consequential, but I'm glad you raised it because in these midterm elections, younger people actually turn out in much lower numbers than they do in the general elections. And when they do that, they're giving everybody else a bigger say in national policy and state policy and local policy that affects their future.
Thank you, Congressman. Joanne, thanks for that question as well. It's obviously of critical importance to your local party that we drive out young people. We've got a really active program, even registering Democrats in our high schools that age in, that you can register to vote at 16. And studies show that when we reach young people at an early age and talk about these issues, then they become voters in the future for their lives. So it's critically important to reach young people. Congressman, our next question comes from Jason in Silver Spring. Jason, you're live on the air.
Hey, Congressman Van Hollen. This is a really great transition, I guess, as we're speaking about young people. Thank you so much for taking this call. So I'm a product of Montgomery County Schools and an organizing fellow in a program called Code for Progress, working on diversity in the tech industry. And we've all heard or read about in the press about the education gap and the opportunity gap that exists between some of our students here in Montgomery County and nationwide, particularly in the sciences and technology. So my question is, what are your thoughts and what's your plan just in terms of making sure students from underrepresented backgrounds do get the support that they need moving forward in this innovation economy?
Yes, thanks for the question. I actually think this is the largest challenge facing our country in the 21st century. We've got lots of important challenges, but we were talking earlier about the job situation. We were talking earlier about the need for more shared prosperity. And a lot of that does begin with educational opportunity. And it begins at the various earliest ages, which is why I strongly support the president's plan to expand access to early education. The president has a plan to fund that, to not only have Head Start, but expand early Head Start and actually make some changes that even improve upon the quality of those educational programs. Second, it goes to making sure we fund a great K through 12 program. Now in Montgomery County, there's been a strong commitment to education, and one of the reasons that it's so important that everyone get out to vote is that we have a county executive and a county council that keeps education a priority. And then same at the state level, because the state has an important role. And at the federal level, in addition to the early education and federal funding for K through 12, you get to the whole issue of funding for college and higher education. And we talked a little bit about that, as you said, in answer to the previous question. But it's absolutely essential that people be able to have an affordable college education. And the president has put forward lots of proposals to do that, which I support. I put together the House Democratic budget. So we increased the amount for Pell Grants, even though Republicans are trying to roll that back. And we also have legislation to keep interest rates very low on student loans. And so those are absolutely critical to making sure that people have access to education, which, as you indicate, is absolutely essential to making sure people have opportunity, that we close the opportunity gap. With respect to science and math, again, the president has a number of really important initiatives, some of which have been funded by the Congress, some which have been blocked as a result of sequester and other things that Republicans have been doing in Congress. But we need to make sure that more and more people have the opportunity to participate in those things. And that's why from early education to K through 12 to higher ed, I think this elections and these policies that the president's outlined make a big difference.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, Jason, for that question. Again, too, you talked about, Congressman, on the state level, and with Lieutenant Governor Anthony Brown, one of his hallmarks, part of his campaign is universal pre-K and investments in early education. And we know Larry Hogan, his Republican challenger, will take us back when it comes to kind of investments in pre-K and universal early education. So
yeah, that's a very important point. A lot of the issues we've been talking about, whether it's universal background checks for guns or gun safety legislation, whether it's raising the minimum wage, whether it's trying to hold down college costs, whether it's funding, as Kevin said, an early education program. The good news is that we've had leadership at the state level with Governor O'Malley and Lieutenant Governor Anthony Brown to move Maryland forward in those areas, so that we've been number one for many years in education. And Anthony Brown is trying to make sure that we keep and build upon that tradition. And his early education proposal is a really important part of that. And that's again, what's at stake in this election in the state of Maryland.
Thank you, Congressman. Jason, thank you again for that question. Congressman, our next question comes from Donald in Chevy Chase. Donald, you're live on the air.
Hello, Congressman. I want to switch to a little different topic, if you don't mind. I want to ask you about the environment and specifically about climate change. I know you have a great environmental record, for which I thank you. I run a small environmental organization that focuses on climate change. We're here in Montgomery County. And I know you have a bill pending on climate change, and I'd like to ask you what you think the prospects are for your bill moving in the next Congress, or there being any other climate legislation in the foreseeable future. I just want to note that A couple of days ago, we unfortunately got a report from the Energy Department that greenhouse gases in the United States are going back up. So I think this is more important today than it was even a week ago. So could you please address that?
Yes, Donald, and thanks for raising this issue because that recent report was alarming. And in fact, as you look around the world with growing economies like China and India, you realize what a challenge that we've got. And this is not a challenge for the future. I mean, people, years ago used to talk about climate change as something we had to watch out for in the future. The damage being done from climate change is here and now. And it's costing us in a big way in terms of extreme weather events, farmers losing their crops, forest fires, much more extreme hurricane events over time. And as you say, also with that comes the spread of disease and all sorts of other huge costs. And all you have to do is ask some of the big insurance companies who are actually building the cost of climate change into their products. And this isn't a matter of theory. This is a matter of dollars and cents, and it's a matter of that right now. So we've got to tackle this issue. Our political process is not always good at tackling issues that people don't see all the effects all at once. And the way to do it is, for starters, what the president has proposed in terms of his carbon pollution regulations that he's moving forward with, that he talked about recently at the United Nations. But the president would be the first to admit that the best approach would be a legislative approach. And as you said, I have introduced a piece of legislation. It's called the cap and dividend legislation. It has the benefit of putting limits on carbon pollution by the sale of what are called these carbon permits. But it then rebates the proceeds from those sales to homeowners. Because the biggest criticism that people have leveled against putting some additional cost on carbon, which is what you need to reduce and incentivize the reduction of the use of carbon, is that it will burden households. And so what we do is return the proceeds from the sale of these permits to households. And it's been estimated by an economist at the University of Massachusetts, a very reputable economist, that 80% of American households would actually do better in terms of dollars and cents than they do today. And that's because it's much higher income households that consume a much disproportionate bigger share of our energy. So to answer the other part of your question, I'm not under any illusions that under a Republican House, this measure that I've introduced will pass. But I do think it's important to start talking about it now as part of the 2016 presidential election. We need to make this a big and central theme in the presidential election so that our next president will continue to build on this issue and hopefully have a Congress that can work with him or her as we go forward in that effort. The last point I will make is the bill I introduced also addresses the fact that we've got to provide incentives for countries like China and India to reduce their carbon pollution. It does so by essentially placing a tariff on goods that we would import from China if China is not also adopting these carbon emission measures, because if we don't do that, we put them at an advantage economically over U.S. Manufacturers, and we don't want to do that.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, Donald, for that question. We're up against that 45-minute mark, and we want to be mindful of everyone's time this evening. I'm going to throw it back to the Congressman for a few closing remarks to kind of frame this election. But before I do, I just want to again say we are 5 weeks out. You've got a local Democratic Party that is fired up and engaged. For the first time, the party is sponsoring telephone town halls like this to reach everybody. Here in the 8th District, we last week hosted one with Congressman Delaney in the 6th District. But we need your help. So please press 1 on your telephone keypad if you can join in our volunteer efforts, if you can knock on doors, if you can make phone calls. And Congressman, I'll leave it to you to kind of frame this election and just how important that is.
Well, thank you, Kevin. And again, thank you for your leadership in the Montgomery County Party and for organizing this call. And, let us close and end where we started, which is just, first of all, thanking all of you for the fact that you've been engaged in the political process, and just to urge you not only to come out to vote yourself, and you've got a record of engagement, but when you're on your way out the door, grab some of your friends and neighbors and bring them with you. Make some calls. If you've got Facebook, Facebook your friends. Midterm elections are very scary from my perspective, because I saw what happened in the 2010 midterm elections when you had a huge wave of Republicans in Congress, in governorships and state legislatures that helped redraw the lines that we talked about in most of our parts of the state. So let me just say, please get out to vote for Anthony Brown and Ken Ullman at the top of the state ticket, for Brian Frosch, for all of our candidates, state and local. And finally, let me just say what a privilege it is to serve you in the House of Representatives. I appreciate all your input, not just tonight, but over the last many years. And with your help, we will break through some of this gridlock over time. It doesn't mean it happens overnight. You got to take the long view. I'm an optimist, and I know that with your help and with grassroots support here and around the country, we will do it. So thank you, and thank you for being part of our great democracy and political process.
Thank you, Congressman Van Hollen, and thanks everyone across the 8th Congressional District. Have a great evening.